Hello and welcome to this FCSI Professional Member Consultant Roundtable from Foodservice Consultant Society International, FCSI. Today we are focusing on the topic of post-pandemic hospitality. My name is Michael Jones from Progressive Content and Editorial Director of FCSI's Foodservice Consultant magazine. This roundtable is kindly supported by Hoshizaki. Sincere thanks to them, and will focus on the next phase of the recovery from the pandemic for the hospitality sector and what the future looks like for an industry still facing some very challenging headwinds. I'm delighted to be joined by 5 outstanding professional member consultants. So let me ask each of them to introduce themselves. Anja, let's start with you first, please.
Hi, I'm Anja Kuechenmeister. I'm the marketing director for Camacho Associates. We're located in Atlanta, Georgia. So most of our projects are everything from public sector to private sector. So colleges, universities, school systems, detention centers, correctional, pretty much everything except marine. So we do quite the gamut of food service work. We also do commercial laundries.
Fantastic. Thanks, Anja. And Steve, please.
Oh, sure. Thank you, Michael. I'm Steve Carlson with Rippe Associates. I'm the president and I also lead the hospitality studio.
Great stuff. Thank you, Steve. And Joe, please.
Hi, Michael. Joe Schumaker with FoodSpace. I'm the founder and president, and we focus mostly on corporate B&I work, but we are branching out into other sectors, doing a little bit of healthcare, doing a little bit of higher education, and happy to be here.
Excellent. Thank you, Joe. Thanks for joining. And Laura, please.
I'm Laura Lentz. I'm with Culinary Advisors. I'm a design principal here with the firm. We are pretty spread across all market segments. We are design consultants. I focus on corporate workplace type of work for the most part, also in healthcare and a little bit in higher ed.
Wonderful. Thank you, Laura. And Ken, please.
Hi, Ken Schwartz with SSA Food Service Consultants. We're food service consultants. We kind of work in all segments of the industry.
Excellent. Thank you, Ken. I say kick things off, please. Can you all in turn maybe just spend a minute or so to detail how the majority of your project work has recovered or otherwise since the hospitality sector began to reopen in recent months? Are you seeing a sense of normality now, or are these still abnormal times for your clients? Anja, can we start with you first, please?
I wouldn't really say that they're abnormal times. I'm going to say that they're different times. People are learning to readjust and figure out what the new normal is. A lot of our projects, went on hold, of course, during the pandemic, but I would say since March of this year, 90% of our projects have come back. Mm-hmm. What is really interesting and I guess not surprising, but still surprising in a way, is that our projects still have the same timeline as if the pandemic never happened. So customers are like, oh, by the way, it's due in 2 weeks. Oh, by the way, it's due in 6 months. Or the project needs to speed up. We're behind the 8 ball already before we've even almost got the project. So that's kind of how it's like, okay, all right, let's replan, let's, recalculate what we need to do and let's get on it and move forward. So I would say that is probably the biggest change, but I wouldn't say abnormal, it's just very different.
Thank you, Anja. Steve, does that chime with you and the experience of your colleagues? Would you say that that's also a kind of an accurate reflection?
I would say so. I mean, I just kind of, if you don't mind, I just did some notes about the market segments that we work in. I mean, I think K through 12, interestingly, those projects continued through the pandemic as if nothing had happened. I mean, even though the operators are making a huge pivot to preparing meals for students to take home. Healthcare projects that went on hold. So that, I mean, obviously the hospitals had to focus on dealing with COVID patients. So those went on hold quickly, but they were also the first to come back. And most of the college university projects that went on hold when the students went home are coming back now. Casinos, I think, have been pretty interesting. I'm sure Ken will talk to this too, but they're getting the customers they want on the casino floor. After all, it is a casino, but the volumes in the food venues are down. So I'll probably talk more about that later. B&I and corporate projects probably seem the most uncertain, but we've got, we still have a number of large projects that have started up in the corporate sector recently. Great.
Thank you, Steve. Ken, let's bring you in at that point then. So Steve mentioned there kind of the volume and the food venue impact on casinos, and maybe also your experience in restaurants. How's that kind of panning out for you guys?
Yeah, it's been interesting. Just want to correct one thing. I said we kind of operate in all segments. One of the segments we don't operate in is anymore is K through 12. And so pre-pandemic, I'd like to say that we were probably operating at about 1,000 miles an hour. And probably 3 weeks into the pandemic, we went down to about 6 miles an hour in terms of volume and types of work and all of those things. And, like literally it was like jamming on the brakes, right? Before you kind of run into the brick wall or the car in front of you. And, with all the weekly calls that we would have and listening what everybody was saying in the industry, I found it interesting which clients were actually staying alive and moving forward with their projects and those that were not. So, in the heat of the pandemic, we were very busy with hotels of varying sizes, from kind of select service like Element hotels and Aloft hotels to full-blown resorts with 19, 20 F&B venues in them, as well as what Steve said, also casinos, right? Casinos were kind of rethinking how to come back to life and how to feed people. And I know there's probably some underlying question, well, what did they do with their buffets, right? How did they handle their buffets? The clients that we had filled the buffets up with slot machines, right? And they haven't reopened their buffets. But we're actually looking at renovating several buffets now into more of a food hall type operation, where it looks and feels more like retail food service. Stuff is made to order versus product being made in bulk day in and day out. The other segment that seemed to stay alive for us as well was healthcare. So even though I think healthcare was overwhelmed with all things pandemic, we had several clients come to us where we were looking at renovating, and I don't know if it was I don't know if it was Anja who mentioned or Laura, where now everything seems to be rush, right? And I do think in the development world, right? Because, and Michael, you and I have talked about this before, when the economy tanked in 08 and 09, one aspect that was different then from the pandemic, aside from the pandemic itself, right, was back then the credit markets completely closed up, right? Mm-hmm. There was no lending, there was no borrowing, there was no money available. The difference in this economy is that the lending institutions were doing everything that they could. Their commodity is lending money. Like the egg salesman is selling eggs and the nuts and bolts salesman is selling nuts and bolts. So if they're not selling their money, they're not making any money. And so, there was a huge pent up demand, I think, by developers that aligned perfectly with lenders. So a lot of very large projects came to life. Now, I do feel like, and you guys can chime in too, we have got a lot of open proposals out on the street, probably starting as early as back in November, December, January, where everybody was like, we got to get a proposal from you. The client's ready to get moving forward. And those have just kind of gone quiet. Mm-hmm. And, every week or every month when we're checking in, they're like, don't worry, it's coming. You guys are going to be working on the project. But it's like, yeah, when? We're if you think about the planes, getting in the queue to approach for a landing, we'd like to start to think about how and when we get these guys in the queue. And it's hard to look into that crystal ball at the moment.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. That's a great summation. Joe, Ken used a great metaphor there about clients kind of jamming on the brakes. What's the kind of state of play with clients that you work with? Are projects decelerated, accelerated, stuck in traffic, to keep using that metaphor? Kind of how are things panning out?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I would imagine Laura would agree in workplace is that there's been a lot of hurry up and wait. And I think, Delta variant kind of threw a curveball, right? There were a lot of reopening plans for early September. there just were. I mean, I think September 9th is a date that will live in infamy. Like every corporate client I had was supposed to open that day, and none of them did, right? And so because January is still now the new floating September, and not knowing what's next, not knowing what's going to happen over the winter and the holidays, right? I think, the plane analogy is a perfect one. We do a lot of MAS consulting as well. So we're kind of seeing this from both sides. And so, we went through different waves of reopening plans and different iterations of what we can reopen with, right? Can we reopen the buffet, and what does that look like? And there's been a lot of movement and changes on that side of things as well. And then I think my last point, especially as it comes to workplace, is that there has been a lot more conversation over the last few months, especially about what is the future of workplace, what are those headcounts going to look like? But more encouraging is how are we going to leverage food and amenities to get people to come to the office? And I think a lot of these conversations have been around that, which is actually quite encouraging, right? So even though we might hot desk or we might have a lower head count overall, we want to actually increase the level of our amenity because we want to drive people into the workplace. And I think that's an encouraging sign, at least in the B&I sector.
Great answer. Thank you, Joe. Laura, same question to you, really. Joe mentioned there that the kind of January becoming the new floating September. Is that also an experience that your company is facing? How are the kind of state of play with projects?
Yeah, we have a number of projects that are sort of aiming towards January. So I would agree with that. I think unlike what I had seen in the past, I feel like now it is much more dependent on the client, even within workplace, for example. Like we have some manufacturing in workplace that is gung-ho and has at least more certainty than other financial, for example, type of clients. So I think it's also sort of segmented the market even further than it was before for us. And I think we see that being short term. I don't think we see that lasting, but at least for now, depending on who we're talking to, the strategy we might go. And that even to me has been in whether we're designing a big food service solution or multiple smaller food service solutions. All of those seem to play into within the market itself, like within workplace itself, exactly what type of client you're serving for. So I think that's what we've seen. We've seen other markets like healthcare, for example, that have been able to sort of plug right along and are pretty much getting back to normal. Their volumes have really been consistent throughout for the most part, at least in let's say this last year. I think they are seeing and planning for the future and moving along, whether it's January or whenever. For us as a company, I'm kind of thinking of what Ken was saying, but we have really seen that the markets themselves and our work has been kind of stop and start. And I guess that to me has fed into that uncertainty, but 1 week it'll be 8 new projects starting up, and then the next week is quiet. So it's been kind of like starting a car with a dead battery type of experience sometimes for us, and it's just made planning more of an adventure, I guess, trying to figure out where
that lack of consistency, I guess, in terms of a typical working week.
Well, and I think like what Ken said, where pre-COVID it was 1,000 miles an hour, right? And so you had the consistency there. You were certain you were going to be busy as heck. Now I feel like it's changed our work-life balance. 1 week work demands a lot of your time, and the next week you've got more flexibility and can balance more with life. So it's just kind of been for us a little more back and forth.
Very interesting. Thank you, Laura. Steve, Laura used that phrase there, back to normal. What are some of the measures that some of your operator clients have implemented that help them get back to normal, that help them to recover quickly? What are some of the things they put in place?
Like Laura said, I think the volume has come up. Certainly using the healthcare examples, they were closed to families and visitors, and now they're open. Volume has come back. But I think everybody is struggling with the labor shortages and supply chain issues. How do you define normal? I don't think we're certainly not back to normal from those standpoints. Basically, kind of the foundations of the assumptions that we had pre-pandemic is that, if I get busy, I'll just hire more staff. Well, that doesn't work anymore. I'll always be able to get my, chicken, whatever. Well, no, that's not true. I mean, I had a conversation with somebody yesterday on a project. Are we going to have fountain soda? Because all that went away with self-service. No, we're not, people aren't concerned about self-serve anymore, but I can't get cups. So we're going to, I can get 20-ounce bottles of soda. So that's what we're going to use. I don't see any normal yet.
No, so. Lots of adaptability, presumably, and having to think on your feet a bit more than previous times.
Oh, for sure. I think you certainly want to keep your menus focused, but you also have to be adaptability based, your menu based on what you can get.
Ken, are there any particularly smart things that you or your clients have taken from maybe other sectors that have helped them to get back on their feet quickly? Has there been any sort of cross-sector learning?
A little bit, but probably the most interesting thing in some of the discussions, and this group had several conversations kind of during our weekly pandemic calls where we had nothing to do but, drink wine and get on a call together, right, and talk about what was going on. But the interesting thing is, of all the clients that we were working on during the pandemic, our marching orders were to design the facilities as though it was pre-pandemic. So we were not being told to change how we design or what we design. Now, as Steve mentioned, there was concern about, even early on, what labor was going to look like, in the future, availability of labor, because I think a lot of people that work in the F&B world, right, whether they're working in a restaurant or dietary in a hospital, right, when they leave those jobs, right, they have to replace that work. They have to replace the income. So I don't think that they have the financial benefit to be able to sit at home too long without actually doing something and earning an income. And just had this conversation over the weekend about, this period that's been deemed the Great Resignation, where people have left their jobs. But what those studies don't speak to is, what jobs did those people take to replace the jobs that they resigned from? Because I don't believe whatever the percentage was, 41 or 42% of the workforce who resigned can afford to sit at home and not replace that revenue. So clearly they've gone to work somewhere, whether they've gone back to work in the hospitality world or, into the corporate world where now they're looking for their employer to feed them, right? It becomes kind of this chain of, where have the people actually gone, right? And how do we replace them? And I think it was Joe who said, and this is true with a lot of our workplace clients, that now they're specifically looking at F&B as being one of those major amenities to help get people back to work. And a lot of those employers who used to subsidize or, pick up a piece of it is now looking to start off offering all of that for free for the time being, just as an additional enticement to get people to come back to work. But Steve hit on something also I think that's vitally important to projects of all type is supply chain, right? We used to go from when we were talking about budgets and timelines on projects, we could tell most clients, you can get anything within 8 to 12 or 8 to 14 weeks, right? Now it's 18 to 26 weeks, 6 months, a half a year to get food service equipment on a job site, right? So, and with the cost increases, right? So we've had a couple of cost increases so far this year. There's going to be probably another one at the end of this year, beginning of next. And I'm hearing rumblings that there'll probably be another one sometime in April. And we're just, our piece is just the food service equipment. So when you start thinking about structural steel, light fixtures, floor tiles, all of these other things that go into a project, right? Developers, owners, clients have got to be wondering how much more of this kind of increase can they tolerate before they start to push the brakes on projects and say, hey, we'll design it now, but we're not going to build it now until the prices start to normalize a little bit.
Yeah, so many plates to spin here. And Laura, on that front, is there any particular technology or innovation that's positively impacted on projects you've worked on since the start of the pandemic? Anything that's helped ease this process?
We have used any tool we could possibly find, to be honest. I mean, in terms of technology, obviously the biggest one is, I think, pick whatever platform you want of this type of format of call. Zoom, Teams, and figuring all of them out. I jokingly used to say if I had $1 for every time I've been looking for a mute button between 2020 and 2021, I'd be a wealthy person. I've also seen there's some really good Miro board is a software that we've seen with shredding and work planning. that I think has been really successful. We kind of globbed onto it actually as a company because we liked it so much. And I think we've all, in terms of presentation, in terms of agendas and such like that, I mean, honestly, on some level, we have done more planning on the front end in order to make calls more effective so that we're not, in phone call mode. I will also credit, I think, our architecture firms, that's pretty much our primary client, at least on an internal design team basis. But I do think a lot of them have gotten better at being wiser about time and how we spend it. For us, a lot of times it's giving us advance notice if they need us on a call because there's food service things that are popping up, or potentially some projects that are at a pace that you're on every week type of thing. So I think we've certainly had to change the way that we work. I want to bounce back, honestly, to something Ken said, which just to respond to it also, because Ken, what you were talking about, I think with supply chain in particular and price increases was a really good point. What I've seen lately, lately meaning the last 6 months, let's say, is that value engineering efforts, like projects that we've had where they want a continual value engineering to make sure they're in budget between schematic, design, development, and contract documents. Every time we do it, we're over budget again. And I think that's sort of been systemic just because prices have increased in the time since the previous design phase. So I think a lot of clients have really, it's changed that effort from a design process perspective, because you almost anticipate that at every phase, you're going to be needing to cut more out just because prices have increased, which is a bit of a shame, especially if you're not building for 3 or 5 years, and ideally it's going to level itself out by then. Some part of me thinks, do we just hold tight, keep the design you want, and anticipate that it's going to be a leveled out stage 3-5 years from now when you're building it.
Great, thanks, Laura. Anja, is there any particular innovative thinking, idea, or technology that has changed the game for your clients, and what's really sort of surprised you in terms of the success of its application?
A lot of our clients haven't really implemented a lot of the technology that we're offering, which we find kind of surprising. But the one product that I would definitely say is definitely the pick up to go, the cabinets like by Carter Hoffman, where someone can come pick up their order that they placed online. That would be something that I would say our clients have felt comfortable with. But as far as other technology, our customers that we've been working with, they're not really focused on that as much. We really try to educate them and let them know that this will help with your lack of labor. This will help produce your menu. We find it interesting and surprising. So we got to still work at that with them, because we really want them to see that, we're your partner. We're here to help you.
Great, Anja. Thank you. Joe, similar question to you. That kind of Anja's point about this will help kind of technology or innovation. Where are you getting traction with your clients in terms of something that you think will genuinely help them in their operation or get them back on their feet quicker?
Some of the new equipment that's out that has really good training and culinary resources, like really helping the client realize and access those things. I think that's a missing piece, so using like induction as a good example, induction has been a very slow adoption rate here in the US for induction, right? And I think part of that has to do with training and just getting chefs and culinarians in front of the equipment to actually cook an egg in an induction pan on an induction burner, right? Like, I mean, if we could just get like half of the chefs in America to just try it, I think the adoption rate would be huge, right? Yeah. And I mean, as everybody on the call knows, and Michael, I'm working on one of the largest all electric kitchens in North America right now, very large food hall, and the pandemic has hurt us a little bit in some of the efforts that we had planned to do in terms of testing while we were building, right? We were going to leverage some of the existing spaces and test some of this stuff. We're slowly starting to see that come back. We're working on an induction French top. So it gives the chef the feel of a French top, but with all of the power and intricacies that induction brings. So those are some of the things that we're working on. But the pandemic, it has certainly slowed down our ability to to help the market get these things. I do want to point out one other technology, kind of as Laura and Ken, everybody kind of said the same thing about these Zoom meetings and these, being one of the younger firms, like we didn't know where VR was going to go, but we heavily invested in it. And what I will say is that, oh man, I'm so glad that we did. The last, year, we have utilized our VR software on every single project. Like it's just baked in now. We don't even do still renderings anymore. We're done doing still renderings. Everything we're doing is in virtual reality. We can project it on a Zoom meeting or on a, choose your platform, right? Find your mute button. But we can also fly with it now. We've got it in a backpack. We can take it literally to any of our clients and they can actually put the goggles on. Now, of course, okay, right? Like we're almost there. Clients haven't quite wanted to do that yet. But the last piece on that is that we can actually record a fly through. So people that can't be on the call or can't write, they can go see that on their own. And so that technology from a design perspective, it's also limiting the amount of travel we have to do. I've been traveling, I don't know how my colleagues feel, but I've been traveling a whole lot less than I was pre-pandemic. And I kind of like to think that that's going to continue. I think we can pick and choose our travel moments a little more efficiently to our schedules now because of the pandemic.
Steve, a question for you. Ken picked up a really interesting point earlier where he talked about how he drew parallels really to the pandemic and previous kind of seismic crises that the industry or the whole world has faced before, like major economic recessions. This being a sort of massive inflection point for the industry, where you've got uncertainty, upheaval, is that actually a good time to make bold decisions like a refurb or invest in new kitchens? Kind of what's your experience, especially with the availability of capital at the moment and things like that? Do these kind of periods in history, is it a good time to make bold decisions?
I think so. I mean, I don't know if it's so bold. I mean, the one that I'm thinking about or we're dealing with a lot is to just kind of take out what Anja said about pre-ordering, where I think the greatest need for that is in healthcare. And it's probably also technologically as hardest, industry for them to implement, because they have to find a pre-order app that can live, behind the HIPAA firewall that they have to create. So that's where I've seen probably, we're designing new facilities for large hospitals, and we're, in the station. There's one station in the serving area that's just pre-order only. I mean, they're expecting that to do 25 to 50% of the orders. I would say, I don't know if that's a bold decision or not, but that's certainly something. I listened to webinars of folks that are operating the QSRs, the drive-through only restaurants, and they are just way out in front of everybody else in terms of technology. I mean, people, opt into that so they can tell when you're driving by. They send you a little, text that said, we got your order ready for it if you want it. I think the rest of us have got to come a long ways to catch up with that. But I think the demand is certainly there. So
great. Thank you, Steve. Ken, do you agree with that? Do you think this is a time to be radical or consistent? Is it time to be bold or to take small steps?
So you guys probably know me well enough to know, I always tend to take the more radical approach to things, kind of right between the eyes. But I also tend to take a couple of steps back, right? Take a couple of steps out of the situation and look from the outside in instead of always looking like from the inside out. And so, in thinking about, how things are changing, right? For us, sometimes it's actually partnering, with one client in one segment and talking to them about their needs and what would actually, take a great operation and make it greater. And then how can we take some of those ideas and implement those into other type projects? So one example, we have a client we've designed a couple of restaurants for, and we're now designing a food hall for them. The client is a software programming guru who just happens to love food service. So he's developed this software. Let's say the six of us went into a food hall and we all wanted something different, right? We have to go divide and conquer, right? We all have to go stand in a line at the particular counter that we want, wait for our moment to order and pay, and then kind of wait around for our food to be ready. Or maybe they give you like a little vibrating coaster and you go find a table and then your food is ready and you bring it, they bring it to you, or you got to go pick it up. My client software is app-based, right? So you can sit down. It immediately identifies what table your party is sitting at. You just go on the app and you can order from any of the venues. You can pay the bill right then and there. And mysteriously, people start bringing you drinks and food and all of this. So we've shared that technology with some of our casino clients who are now thinking about taking their traditional buffets and converting them into food halls.
Yeah.
And they were gung-ho with the food halls. And I said, well, tell me how that's going to work. I said, because I see a lot of your customers, dragging an oxygen tank or in a wheelchair or with a walker. And now you're going to make them stand in line for 10 minutes to order their food, wait to get a tray. And then how are they managing with the tray? And they said, well, I said, no, forget that, because you're missing the important point. I said, now think about the guest who comes and sits down, orders immediately. They're spending right away, right? They're consuming right away. I said, all of that time that they've spent either waiting for food at a counter or waiting to order the food is not time they're sitting back at their favorite game, dropping pennies, dimes, quarters, dollars in it. And I said, isn't that your goal, to get them back on the gaming floor? And they're like, okay, now you have our attention, right? It's genius. And so we've taken one client and introduced them to other clients who are now all of a sudden, right, there's this terrific synergy coming about. And so a lot of times it's just kind of what we pick up along the way, right? Mm-hmm. Or it's even what we hear in some of these kinds of conversations. And I got cornered, and I'll share this with you guys, and maybe some of you guys are familiar with this. But I got cornered a couple of weeks ago, when we're talking about pandemic. And Michael, I thought you were going to touch on this, right? Because it sounded like the question was going there. What is the single most labor-saving piece of equipment in a kitchen? Because to me, today, with such a labor shortage, it's the most important question there could be.
Yep. And
I had somebody ask me that question, and I had to think about it for a few minutes, even though I knew the answer from a few years ago. And I'll share with you guys the answer to that question. The answer is the ventilation system. It's not an oven. It's not a fryer. It's not smart technology. It's none of that bullshit everybody's trying to sell us. Is ventilation. And how that came about, ASHRAE, Michael, which is the Association of you're familiar with who that is.
Yeah.
Did a third-party study a couple of years ago. And the result of that study said, basically, I'm going to paraphrase, that for every 10 degrees an environment is out of the comfort zone of an employee, the employee's productivity immediately drops by 30%. So I share this with the client, and I said, what that means to you is the thing that you're trying to VE out is actually the thing that saves you money. Yeah. Because if you think about it, for almost every 3 people, you have to add a fourth. And in a day like today, where the fourth person doesn't exist, hardly the third or the second, right? You're scrambling to find employees who will show up. That's probably the single most important factor in a kitchen. When I start sharing that with clients, I just had this conversation yesterday with a casino client who's thinking about going through this big renovation. And I said, you need to think about looking at this. Because the first thing he started crying about is, I can't get people to come to work. My dishwasher, I got to replace the dishwasher every week. The people working on the line, half of them will show up. And I said, here's something you should look at. And he said, I never thought about it. And I said, and for whatever the incremental cost is for a more efficient system, and I'm not going to necessarily discuss anybody's particular system. I said, if your labor costs are $30,000 to $40,000 a year per person for the lower level person, I said, think about what that costs you for every person whose productivity drops by 30%. And he's like, you just made my head hurt. And so, and I think these are kind of more of those conversations we need to have, right? And because I think as consultants, right, it's part of what helps us create value to our clients, right? Yeah. Is to understand that we can take these things. And it's funny when you think about that study and you're like, wow, but that holds true, if you're manufacturing cars or, if you're in a steel plant or some other place, that study holds true, probably for every industry that's producing or working on something. So just thought I'd share that.
Yeah, I just have to say this, but what an exciting time this is for food service. I mean, I hate to say it because I realize it's been, a very down time. But at the same time, I've never seen food service changing so much. I've never seen hospitality and design be as challenging as it is right now. I've never seen or had so many conversations to try and, understand what is happening, what is changing, who's doing what. I mean, I hate to say that on some level, but I do think it's the truth. Man, it is an exciting time. Supply chain, labor, equipment. It's really remarkable in some senses for just how different and exciting of a period of time it is.
It's not a moving target, things. Right? It's kind of like this metamorphosis, right? It's kind of this, it's flowing, right? We don't know where it's going to end up or where the turns are going to take us, right? But it is kind of this thing in motion. And you guys probably all know it, right? Like all of your clients are looking at us going, tell us what to expect, right? Like whether it's lead time or staff issues or what's the greatest widget. And we want to get people back to work, right? And I know some of you guys probably work with Gensler, right? Who does a lot of workplace. And I don't know if you guys saw, they did a study on workplace. And so they polled, and I may get this wrong because numbers are hard, but the people that they polled, like 82 or 84% of the employees that they polled said that they would prefer to come back to work in an office. And of those polled, it was like, 14 or 17% said they would like to come back, but only 4 days in the office and 1 day remote. But this was the interesting part of that. Single biggest reason for wanting to come back to work in the office was fear of missing out. Now, I didn't read to see what that meant in terms of, am I missing the social interaction? Am I missing, my boss who's now not seeing me start work at 5 a.m. and stop at 7 p.m. and work my way up the corporate ladder. But, it was fear of missing out. And so, to Joe's point, I do think a lot of the employers and workplace environments are going to really start to dig in and figure out what to do to not only get people back to work, but to hire new people, right? Yeah. Those that have left, right? They're going to have to replace those bodies. And so I think there's going to be, again, this whole kind of free flowing thing of how things will change. And I think that's a very good point, Laura. I think, right, collectively as food service consultants, right, we're kind of on the front line to help direct the, which way that's all going to go.
I think that's an excellent point. Let's stay on the labour issue now. Anja, question for you. We're talking here about obviously the labour crisis in food service. Do you think that is going to continue to be the Gordian knot that we're going to struggle to crack? Is it surmountable? How do we convey, Ken's point there about, this is an exciting time and Laura's point as well?
Well, I think that's a really good question. And I don't have my crystal ball either, but I think, with the lack of labor that's going on right now, there's also not just lack of labor, but lack of qualified labor. Even with the technology knowledge that we share with our customers, the people that we're working with don't have the full understanding of how to use the equipment, or better yet, for example, the dishwasher that needs to be hired every week, the training that they were taught last week, the new person doesn't have that training. So we're constantly in that cycle right now. I hope and I'm positive and have faith that it will eventually even out. But I think it's definitely a hurdle and something that we have to really work with. Not only that, but also going back, sidestepping kind of to what Ken was just saying and what Laura was just saying is the people that are coming back to the offices, there's different groups within that office. And I thought this was really interesting as you take a look at people who have been there a longer period of time, the older generation, they want to be around people. And so they really want to come back to the office. Yet the younger people that are coming out of college, for instance, they're used to working remotely. They don't really need to, or they don't really feel or understand the need to develop relationships yet. So there's kind of this, diametric of opposites going on here, where you've got the younger people that are, willing to, work remotely, and the older people that want to develop those relationships and offer the mentoring that goes along with it. So lack of labor, I think, is going to be here for a while. But once again, I think it's that we have to figure out what that is. And it's that metamorphosis of which direction are we going and how are we going to work with this? So
great answer,
I hope
Anja.
that answers
Thank you.
the question.
It does. Steve, how is automation going to help plug the gap in the meantime until we do figure that out?
Yeah, I think so. I'm just going to tag on to what Anja said. I think it's definitely the shortage of skilled labor. One thing we've been seeing a lot of is, maybe it's unfortunate, sort of the ghost kitchen. It's the somewhere in the facility where people are ordering online or on their phone. And obviously a cook can make more orders if they don't have to interact with a customer. But I think, for a while, we're going to have to lose something. I think that's just a reality. We're just going to have to hunker down. A couple of people, work on a simplified menu, whether we put it in one of those lockers or we just put it in a cubby, they come and get it. I hope we get back to the point where the customer can kind of decide, where do they want to be on that convenience service scale, right? And right now, I think we're going to have to say it's all about convenience. We'll make you something to order maybe next year. The operators are going to have to take on the responsibility for training. They used to be able to go out and hire somebody, put them to work, here, you know what to do. So you're going to have to do a lot more investment in video training. I would say to the manufacturers, and I think what Joe was talking about this with induction. If they can provide some of that training materials to the operators, I think that would be great. Where they're probably behind in pre-order technology, they're way ahead of everybody else in terms of using robots for transporting patient trays or receiving, pallets. So I think that we're going to start to see, our large corporate campuses, casinos, start to using some of those, tugs are the word I think everybody uses for those. And I'll be interested to see, in some of what I call kind of the more show automation, almost like an arcade machine, the automated pizza, salad, smoothie, whether those are, are more of are they looked as a novelty or are they true labor saving? Right now when we talk to clients about those, they're expensive and many of them are lease options. So, but when an operator gets to the point of I don't have the option of having a person do that job anymore. So I'll be curious to see how much of those are accepted.
Joe, just to bring you in on that, Steve there talked about the kind of some automated equipment where there's a novelty factor, or is it genuinely labor saving? Do you have a view on that? Obviously, you use a lot of automation in your operations.
Yeah, I do. And I think automation is sort of it's a weird term right now, because to get to fully automated kitchens, we're a long ways away from that, right? The question is whether or not we can bring in some pieces of automation to lower the labor need. And I think, even some simple things like combi ovens and blast chillers that have pre-programs in them that allow for maybe one less prep person or one less sous chef, right? And I think those are really simple things where the technology exists now. In fact, there are a lot of kitchens where this technology is already in the kitchen and they just don't know how to use it. So, to Steve's point about the training, I do think that needs to come from the manufacturers. The other thing I've been seeing is that, the manufacturers will offer ongoing versions of this training. And in some cases from the manufacturers, they'll do it once or twice a year for free. They don't even charge anything. You just have to ask. And I think our job as consultants is to make sure that the clients and the operators actually know that that's out there. One other thing, and this is going back to an earlier point that Ken made about the exhaust systems. I think the other big thing that we probably don't touch as much as we should, and maybe some of us do, some of us don't, but is front of house labor and the automation that we can do in the front of house. One thing that the pandemic did is it accelerated the use of personal device. And this is a big topic, I think, right now for all of us. We were already kind of tipping the scale into kiosks and, cashierless systems and how the transaction happens, with less people. I think this is that moment in time where we can rip the Band-Aid on that, because the consumer in general is all of a sudden used to using their own smartphone to order food or figure stuff out, right? And so if we can reposition that labor from the front of the house to the back of the house and focus back on the food, and then that toggles into one other point, which Steve just started to make, about sort of this balancing act between convenience and experience. I think personally, if you look at the stadiums that have opened up over the last 6 months, for real, you look at NFL as an example, there is so much pent up demand for in-person experiences that, as you know, jurisdictionally all over the country, it's different, right? Depends if you're in a red state or a blue state, if we're being totally honest, right? There's a lot of things that are affecting whether or not we can go out and eat in the way that we're used to or want to. I think what's going to happen is we've been forced to go to convenience for almost 2 years now. At some point, the floodgates will open and experiential food service will not only come back, it will likely come back, in a big way. And so in order to help the operators actually achieve this, we have to bring in use of personal device technologies. We need to bring in some automation back of house so that these restaurants don't just get, and I mean, restaurants across all sectors, they don't just get slaughtered once we can come back and have experiences again in a high level, right? And I think there's not a simple hey, this solution is going to answer all of these problems. I think we need to utilize this multitude of technologies, front of house, back of house, leveraging the manufacturers, swapping out a convection oven for a combi oven with a programmable menu, and educating the end user on the value of that, and then getting the manufacturers involved to support that. That's our job. And that's what we can do in small doses on every project, whether it's a new project, a remodel, whatever. I think those are the things that we have to do.
I think it's an excellent point, Joe. Before we get some final thoughts on the future of post-pandemic hospitality, Laura, a quick question to you. Staying on the subject of issues where there are no simple solutions, as Joe just flagged up, let's talk about sustainability for a moment. Do you feel like the pandemic has in any way made us reassess the issue of sustainability and maybe the sort of vulnerability or fragility of the systems around us? Do you feel like operators are taking sustainability more seriously now than before they were before the pandemic?
I think so. I mean, I think we are first confronted with the fact that everyone is forced, as Joe and Steve just talked about, everyone is forced towards convenience right now. So, and that between that and just the pandemic itself, I think with this huge swing towards disposables, I don't even think it was a question for a long while in a lot of our serveries. It's interesting because just yesterday I was talking through this with a client who's international, right? So Europe and much more familiar with permanent ware as a solution. And I think their perception about that being more sustainable is greater than here in the US. And I think a lot of that is just because of our infrastructure here in the US when it comes to what we can recycle, when it comes to what's available, at least here on the East Coast, for a client who wants to compost. I feel like right now that is still very sort of grassroots. If you want to compost your product, you might be lucky enough to be in an area where you can call up Waste Management and they'll pick it up. But I think a lot of it, is about making connections with farmers yourself, partnering with your maybe local suppliers. So I think it's still sort of very grassroots. I think, at least for right now here in the US, we often talk about how you could almost make a case in either direction, and it's sort of a 50-50 split, at least when you talk about disposables to permanent ware. But I do think that's going to change greatly. I think during the pandemic, we've also had this huge moment of reconciliation with climate change and just realizing, wow, this is a big thing. I think we're all paying attention to it a lot more. I am desperately hoping that here in the US, we do a better job at getting on sustainability. And for me, I personally am kind of like, I don't care if we go to recycling, but let's figure out how to recycle everything. I don't care if we decide to go to permanent wares, but then let's figure out how to sort, and let's all be responsible as individuals and actually put the compost or the food waste in the food waste bin. I think that's probably even bigger than the designers and MAS consultants here in this thing. I think it's all up to our country as individuals, but I think sustainability is as uncertain as a lot of design elements. I think we're going to continue to be forced for convenience for a while, honestly, myself. So I think disposables are going to stay paramount for a while. But I also would like to think that we're going to find a solution that actually solves the problem.
Great. Thank you very much, Laura. Okay, final thoughts now then, please. If we go through the panel, if you could just quickly sum up then whether or not you are generally optimistic that post-pandemic food service will find itself in a robust state or even in rude health in, say, 2 years' time. Can we start with you first, please, Ken?
I'm very optimistic. I think it's as short as 12 months. But in definitely a couple of years, I think the industry will be completely robust.
Yeah, I tend to completely agree. I think there's one big unknown, which is how long does it take the public to make that transition from convenience to experience? And I think that timeline, although I agree with Ken that it'll be robust, I'm not sure if in 2 years we've made that complete switch back.
For the type of work we do, I definitely am thinking in years versus months. That said, I totally can appreciate restaurants and some of the markets that are able to move faster. I have some projects that aren't even going to be built for 5 or 10 years. And so I think it's going to be a bit of a longer haul. I also think that there are other things going on between the economy and other things that are going to sort of fall out. So maybe it's not the pandemic, but I feel like there's going to be a long road to recovery, that other elements are going to start to impact and change food service again.
I agree with Laura's thoughts. I think it is going to definitely come back. I think we're going to be continuously busy with this stop and go. But to Laura's point of this process that we're in, the client might take 5 years. And during that process, they're definitely going to be changing and modifying because there is still so much uncertainty, but more so new development. And so I'm very positive that it's going to come back. Just when, it just might be a little bit longer than we expected.
Sure. I would say I'm very optimistic too. I think for a lot of the reasons that Joe mentioned about the stadium events or whatever, the pent up demand for people to want to go out. I think just with my experience now, just going to a restaurant and getting used to the convenience for curbside, and they're sort of saying, some of them are saying, no, we've opened our dining room. We're not going to let you do that anymore. So I think it's definitely going to be some changes. I think that I want to also reiterate what Ken said about, focusing on ventilation or making the kitchen a better place to work. I think that employers or restaurants are going to have to do that to bring those staff back. I think that maybe certainly in the restaurant business, food service business, I think the employees are going to have the upper hand over the employer. And maybe it sounds like Joe was talking about that in the B&I as well, and I think all that's going to help food service.
Great. Thank you very much, Steve. I think that's a perfect place to draw the roundtable to a close on. It's been a fascinating and a fun debate as well from a superb panel. Anja, Laura, Steve, Ken and Joe, my thanks to you for joining us today. I'd also like to thank Hoshizaki for supporting the event. Thank you for watching, and please stay tuned to fcsi.org for future events. Thank you.